and welcome to a worship service that is out of this world. I've been thinking about that one for a while. Uh, Glad that you're here. I hope that you are as excited about VBS starting as our kids are. If you don't know and not aware, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of man hours that have gone into what you see and what you're gonna see. And if you there's one predominant leader in all that spearheading this effort, and Tina. And if you get a chance, thank her for all that she's done and all she's still doing. And she can divert the glory to other people as she sees fit. But certainly, we're thankful for her and her efforts. We are talking in 1 Timothy chapter 6, what Cameron read for us, verses 6 through 10, about things, materialism, the pursuit of junk. Even at a young age, I was just thinking that we've got uh, at 3 years old, our daughter would uh, come to us, and she's got this little, checkout scanner where pretend to be a little clerk, and she would always look for a barcode because she knew that's where stuff got checked out at, right? That's what you scan in order to pay for it. Like even at a young age, we have this sense of things and material possessions. I was reading this past week a book by an author, a member of the church, and he said, and this is in a book that is completely unrelated to this lesson. But he said that one of the greatest threats that he believes that is uh, being posed to the church is not denominationalism or liberalism or conservatism or any other ism. It's materialism. The pursuit of stuff. In this text, in 6 through 8, what you see is what it means to be content. And this is what we all strive for, is to be content and to be happy with what we have. But the very how many of you have watched TV this week? Okay, most of you. How many of you have seen a commercial this week? How many of you feel like you've seen more commercials than you have the show that you're watching? The very idea behind the commercial, in whatever form it is, on the radio or on TV, it's to make you want something else, right? It's to instill in us this idea that we need something that we don't have. Isn't that advertising? And like that's the gist. But it's a pursuit of materialism that is plaguing the world that we live in. In 6 through 8, again, this is the content. Those who can bypass that. Look at what it says here. But godliness is a mean of gain. As opposed to, we were talking last week about these false teachers who had this idea that they can get gain by teaching something that is pleasing to men. Godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing with these, we will be content. That's what it means to be content. There's a word in verse 6, godliness. And I think that is a key word here, to be godly. If you want contentment in this world, if you don't want to be consumed by the latest and the newest, and if you don't want to pursue those things, then what you need to pursue is godliness. To be like God. You want to be like God. And in fact, that's what we all want to do. That's what we all ought to want to do. But I'm going to take it a little step further. And I don't think I'm too far off here. I don't think that we can be content without God. I believe with all my heart that within man is this God-shaped hole that people try to fill and stuff with all sorts of different kind of things and people and activities. And at the end of the day, none of those things are going to produce contentment. They're not going to make anybody happy. Only God can fill that void, that God-shaped hole in man. There's a whole host of passages that speak to things like this or an idea like this. In Hebrews, for instance, just a couple of pages later, at the end of Hebrews, very last chapter, chapter 13, verse 5 says, keep your life free from love of money and be content with what you have. For he said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now, if you're thinking Matthew chapter 28, this is one of the things that Jesus said right before he left, right? The Great Commission, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. And the application that the Hebrew writer is, you can be content with that because God is with you. Jesus is with you. He'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. In Habakkuk, if you haven't studied a book or the book of Habakkuk, in its historical setting, you're missing out. Habakkuk was a bold prophet, and there's a lot of bad things that were happening in Habakkuk's time. He was facing these horrible people that were taking over the world. They were just marching on city and country, and they were conquering everybody, the Chaldeans. And the threat was coming to Judah. It was coming to the Israelites finally. And it was prophesied in Habakkuk. At the end of the chapter, at the end of the book, chapter 3, Habakkuk says in verse 17, though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Right? If everything that I trust, if everything that I need is not there, if everything that my life, what I believe my life is built on, is not there, and if the Chaldeans come and they destroy everything, yet in verse 18, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Last verse of Habakkuk. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me tread on high places. Isn't that fascinating? Like with God, there's peace, there's contentment, there's this solace that can never be found in the world. And no matter how many things you consume, surround yourself with, it's not going to be there. But with God, it doesn't matter what you have. It doesn't matter if you have nothing. You can be at peace. Godliness with contentment is of great value. If we have God, then we can be content with next to nothing. But that's kind of, as he elaborates in verse 7, we understand that it's just temporary. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. We understand how temporary these things are, right? It doesn't matter how much you love them and how much you care for them. I remember listening to one guy one time. He said, and he was talking about his truck. He said, "Man, I really love my truck. You know, like most rednecks do. I really love my truck." He said, "But you never fall in love with a hunk of metal." And I know one guy who drove a truck off the lot, bought it brand new, and before he drove it off the lot, he took a hammer, ball peen hammer, dent. He said, "All right, I put the first dent in." You don't fall in love with things. There's lessons in that, isn't there? Because things are temporary. It's not going to last forever. You know, we have perhaps things that we just love and we cherish, and those are the things that are very important to us. We've got a dresser from the 1800s in our house. Brittany thinks it's hideous. I love it. But I love it not because it's pretty or anything, but I love it because it came from my great grandfather who died early in life. Like that, those things we cherish. But at the end of the day, it's just stuff. You've heard it said, nobody pulls a U-Haul behind a hearse. And it's true, isn't it? Like these pharaohs, they were buried in like the pyramids, surrounded by all their stuff. But what? At what? Why? You can't take it with you. Far too often, we are controlled by our things. And we don't have to be rich in order to be controlled by stuff. Don't take that away from this. You don't have to have a lot in order to be controlled by. You can have very little and be controlled by that. But we need to understand that it's all temporary. After the passing of John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon, right? Basically invented a monopoly. After his passing, supposedly, they asked his secretary, how much money did he leave? And the secretary's response was, all of it. He left all of it because we can't take it with us. At the end of the day, what are we doing? Why have these things? We need to understand the temporary nature in material things. In verse 8, all right, when we're still focused on the content in this world. Verse 8 says, "But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content." It doesn't sound like a whole lot, does it? Just give me something to eat. It might not be good. Give me something to put on. It might not be what I want to wear. And with that, I'm going to be happy. Some of us wouldn't know what to do, would we? But we can be content with so little, or we ought to be able to be content with so little. But that sentiment is not new to Paul. He's not one that invented that. Obviously, he's writing with the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, but this is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6. If you remember in verse 25, he says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing?" Jesus' idea is that there are more important things in life than to be consumed about what you're going to eat, what you're going to wear. Don't let those things control you. Life is much more about serving God. And again, we follow this context all the way through. And we see that when we serve God, he's going to take care of us. He's going to provide for us. And in fact, at the end of this particular passage, in verse 33, he says this, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. If you seek first the kingdom of God. Verse 33, seek God. He's going to take care of you. Then you're going to be content. I do not believe that we can be content in this world without God. I think we will always be trying to fill that void in our life with something. But when we fill it with God, there's contentment. A great commentary on this passage, or on this idea of being content. A great commentary is found in Philippians. When Paul, in another passage, writing to the church of Philippi, he says this, beginning of verse 11. He says, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. And in every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. And it's in that context, not in any other context, that verse 13 is there. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Boy, we need a lesson in that, don't we? Just being content with what we have. I think we would do well to sing the song often to ourselves. And again, I'm just as guilty as anybody else. Count your many blessings. Name them one by one. What would our life look like if we counted our blessings every day? If we woke up and we said, God, thank you for air. Thank you for a bed and a pillow. Thank you for eyes that I can see. And if we just went down the list of how grateful and the things that we're grateful for, we would be content. I firmly believe that. But that's verses 6 through 8. That's those who are content in this world. But you see the decline in verse 9, and that's where it begins to unfold. But those in verse 9, the decline, those who desire to be rich, fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Now, that doesn't sound very great. I don't want to be a part of that. First of all, they desire. This is their pursuit. It's this idea that it's what they want or intend. They set their heart on it. It's what they wish for. What are they wishing for? They're wishing for riches, things, material, the temporary things. And when they do that, the rest of the verse, it goes on to say, they fall into temptation, into a snare. The idea is that they are like a snare. They're completely engulfed. They're swallowed up in temptation. When we surround ourselves with things, that's all we think about. It consumes our mind. It consumes our actions. And eventually what it does, as it engulfs us, it consumes our soul. So the people who want and wish and set their heart on being rich or having things, it's a temptation where they are engulfed in the loss of their souls. In the rest of this verse, they are plunged into ruin and destruction. These ruin and destruction, virtually synonyms. You look up destruction and you're going to get ruin. You look up ruin, you're going to get destruction. The word that the ESV translates as plunge is interesting. It's akin to the word that is translated as baptize. The idea behind plunge is like that of a shipwreck. The ship breaks up and it is destroyed. Ruin and destruction. And it's not like a gradual falling and sinking. It's gone. They are plunged into ruin and destruction. It's a slow decline into death is what it is. When we consume our hearts and our minds with material goods, we are slowly killing our soul. Verse 10 leads us to the deterioration or the detriment when we fall into this desire for materialism, of money or things or goods, whatever you want to call it. This is what happens. Verse 10, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and have pierced themselves with many pangs. You see the detriment here. It's interesting because the root, I think that's a very important word here. For the love of money is a root of all sorts, all kinds of evil. The root, right? That is what bears up the plant. This is the foundation, the fundamental beginning of temptation, of all sorts of evil. It portrays what happens at the top. So when money and the materialism, when that is the root of your desire, what happens is what follows. It gives way to all sorts of evil. And the first beginning, the beginning of this is the craving. This is what happens first. The craving is literally to stretch oneself, right? To stretch after something. I've got this image in my mind when I think about someone craving something. Maybe you've seen this. Maybe you've done this before. You're at a vending machine, okay? Here's the vending machine right in front of you. And in this vending machine here on the bottom row is something that you want. Let's call it a ding-dong. All right. There's a ding dong right there on the bottom row. And you've got skinny enough arms. You know where I'm going. Where you think, I could reach up there and get that. Because I want it. So what you do is you get down on your knees and you stretch up in that vending machine. And you move your hand around to the point where you got it. That's this idea, the image behind someone craving to stretch. It is this exertion of energy to the point where you just have to have it. You're craving it. And by craving it, what has happened is that the next step, right? Step number 2, some have wandered away. They've wandered away from the faith. Now, this is, as you're reading along, this is something that happens to you. It's not something that you do. But wandering away is something that happens to you. So as you're craving and as you're stretching for the material things in life, what you are really doing is you are allowing the material things to lead you away from the faith. So in your mind, you're just like, man, I just want that. Like I just craving that, or I desire that, whatever it is. But internally, there's something else happening that is leading your heart away from God. It's just taking you one step further away from God, away from the faith. And as you leave the faith, step number 3 in verse 10, you've craved it, you've begun wandering away, and now you have pierced yourself with many, many pangs. Interesting to me, perhaps not to you, is the reflexive pronoun in that they have done it to themselves. It's not something that God has done, and it's not something that anybody else has done to them. They have pierced themselves. So when you desire the material things in life, and when your heart is burning with passion for the temporary, what you are doing is you are taking those material things and you are shoving them into your heart. You are stabbing yourself. You're piercing yourself. But it's not with the money. It's with all the harmful things that come along with it. Spiritually, you get corrupt. Emotionally, you get corrupt. Physically, you get drained and corrupted by all these desires that draw your heart away from God. Here's one of the problems, one of the many problems with materialism. It's a slow, slow leak. Marshall Keeble, preacher in the Brotherhood from decades ago, he said, when most people leave the church, it's not a blowout. Rather, it's a slow leak. Materialism is one of those slow leaks. It can slowly creep into your life. Another bad thing about materialism and the love of money is that we can put on a facade and we can pretend and we can make everybody else believe that we don't care about the things in the world. We can go to church, we can sit in a pew, we can give, we can do whatever it is. But inwardly, we're consumed with things imperceptible to other people. I don't know where you're at in your life, but I know that you cannot be content without God. If He's not in your life, put Him there. Put Him on in baptism. Get right with Him. Or maybe you need to come back. Would you do that as we stand and as we sing?